The silence of the Sol system was a carefully curated lie, an enforced tranquility that had lasted for 500 Terran years. From the outside, it was perfect. A pristine diorama of a star and its orbiting children, encapsulated within the shimmering, gossamer shell of the stewardship's quarantine field. It was presented to the galaxy not as a cage, but as a sanctuary, a preserve for the volatile, unpredictable species known as humanity until they could mature into a less chaotic form. But for those inside, it was a constant, suffocating reminder of their perceived inferiority, a silent declaration that they were too dangerous, too primitive, to be trusted with the cosmos. That was about to change. The arrival of the assessment fleet was not a surprise. It was an inevitability humanity had been preparing for since the day the field went up. They did not come as a crude armada of warships, all sharp angles and weapon emplacements. The stewardship was far too sophisticated for such vulgar displays. Their vessels were works of art, crystalline lattice structures that caught the distant sunlight and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows. Ships that looked more like sculpted nebulae or frozen music than instruments of power. They moved without propulsion, gliding through the void with an effortless grace that belied their true purpose. They arranged themselves in a perfect geometric pattern around Neptune's orbit, a celestial mandala signifying order, harmony, and absolute authority. This was the fleet of the Galactic Gardeners, the shepherds of cosmic law, and they had come to prune a branch they feared might grow in the wrong direction. On Janus Station, a sliver of polished obsidian and blinking lights hanging in the deep blue shadow of Neptune, Dr. Eris Thorne watched their arrival on the main observatory screen. He was not a soldier or a diplomat. His hands were those of a theorist, accustomed to the delicate touch of a holographic interface, not the weight of a weapon or the fate of a species. Yet here he stood, the designated voice of all humanity, the sole point of contact for the beings who held his world in a gilded cage. He felt a tremor in his fingers and clasped them behind his back, forcing a posture of calm he did not feel. The bridge around him was silent, staffed by the best and brightest Earth had to offer, every one of them aware that this single moment was the fulcrum upon which their future would turn. They had known this day was coming, had tracked the subtle energy shifts in the quarantine field for weeks, but the reality of it, the sheer, overwhelming presence of the stewardship, was a cold weight in the pit of his stomach. Eris closed his eyes for a moment, shutting out the vision of the crystalline fleet, and reached out with his mind. Not with any innate psychic ability, but through the neural lace woven into the fabric of his cerebral cortex, a conduit to humanity's greatest and most secret creation, far beyond him, deep in the scattered, frozen chaos of the Kuiper Belt. It resided. It had no name, for it was not a thing to be named. The scientists who had birthed it had called it the Nexus, a simple descriptor for something that defied simple description. From a distance, it appeared as nothing more than a single point of light, a star that shouldn't be there, burning with a quiet, steady luminescence that was not fusion, but something far more fundamental. The Nexus was the Gestalt consciousness of humanity's most brilliant minds, a quantum-entangled network of biosynthetic neurons and captured space-time geometry. It was the distilled essence of human potential, their defiance, their fear, and their unyielding will to survive, all woven into a single, self-aware entity that existed simultaneously as a physical object and a pure thought. Eris could feel it now, a vast and placid ocean of awareness at the edge of his own consciousness. It did not speak in words, but in concepts, in feelings of pure, unshakable resolve. It was humanity's message, their declaration, and their final, unspoken warning to the universe. A soft chime brought him back to the bridge. "Sir," said Communications Officer Lena Petrova, her voice a strained whisper. "We are being hailed. It's not a standard signal. It's broadcasting directly into our minds." Eris nodded, his mouth dry. "I feel it. Put it on screen. Lena, let's give them the courtesy of a face." The main screen dissolved from its view of the fleet into a swirling vortex of liquid light. From it, a form coalesced, a being of pure energy that resembled a classical sculptor's rendering of a divine messenger. It was beautiful and terrifying in its perfection, its features vaguely humanoid but lacking any distinguishing marks, its voice echoing not through the air, but directly within the synaptic pathways of every human on the station. "I am the Arbiter." The voice resonated, a symphony of serene authority. "I speak for the stewardship. Your period of sequestered growth is at an end. Children of soul." The condescension was as smooth as polished glass. Eris felt a flash of anger, but he suppressed it, letting the calm of the Nexus wash over him. "I am Dr. Eris Thorn," he said, his own voice amplified through the station's external speakers. A quaintly primitive method by comparison. "I speak for a unified humanity. We welcome you, Arbiter. Though we have long questioned the necessity of our sequestered growth." In the Arbiter's light form seemed to incline its head, a gesture of patronizing amusement. "The cradle is necessary to protect the infant from the vastness of the cosmos, and to protect the cosmos from the infant's flailing hands. For centuries, we have watched you. We have seen your potential for creation and your staggering potential for self-destruction. We have guided your development with subtle nudges, filtered the cosmic radiation that might have altered your path, and waited for you to achieve planetary unity. You have accomplished this. You are ready to be welcomed into the galactic harmony. We are ready to take our own place." Eris corrected gently. "As equals." The light of the Arbiter flickered, a momentary disruption in its perfect serenity. Equality is a concept born of limitation. The stewardship does not deal in equals. It deals in function, in purpose, in the grand, harmonious design. And your species has created a dissonance, a flaw in the song. The Arbiter's energy form shifted, and the view on the screen behind it changed. It was an energy map of the solar system, but one of impossible fidelity. And there, at the edge of the system, was the Nexus, depicted as a screeching, violent tear in the fabric of space-time. The image was a lie, a deliberate, terrifying misrepresentation. "We have observed this anomaly for some time." The Arbiter's mental voice continued, now laced with a cold, clinical precision, a singularity of improbable energies. "It is a violation of the natural order, a concentration of potential that upsets the balance we have so carefully maintained. It is a weapon, is it not?" "Dr. Thorn, a primitive, brutish thought to forge your very potential into a tool for violence." Eris's heart hammered against his ribs. They knew. Of course they knew. Their surveillance had always been more total than humanity had imagined. "It is not a weapon," Eris stated, the calm of the Nexus flowing through him, giving his words a strength he didn't know he possessed. "It is our guarantor of sovereignty. It is our voice. For 500 years, we have been voiceless, observed in a planetary terrarium. We were never given a choice, never asked if we wished for your protection. The Nexus is our declaration that we will no longer be silent children. It is the culmination of our right to exist on our own terms. Your terms are irrelevant," the Arbiter replied, its form seeming to grow brighter, more intense. The serene facade was beginning to crack, revealing the unyielding steel beneath. "The existence of this Nexus is a threat to stability. Its quantum dissonations echo throughout this sector. It is an uncontrolled variable, and the stewardship does not permit such things. You believe it to be your salvation, but it is a cancer. We're here to excise it. We are offering you a choice. A final gesture of our magnanimity. The offer came, as smooth and cold as a surgeon's blade. Sever your connection to the anomaly. Dismantle the construct. Allow our attunement engineers to pacify the quantum instability it has created. Rekindle your species to our tutelage. We will guide you. We will teach you the proper way to exist, the correct path to ascension. You will join the harmony as a functioning, productive part of the whole. This is your only path forward. The alternative was left unspoken, but it hung in the void between the crystalline ships, a promise of utter annihilation delivered with a beatific smile. Aris looked at the faces of his crew, at their pale, determined expressions. They had known this choice was coming. Humanity had debated it for decades. Submission or defiance, a gilded cage or a fight for an uncertain freedoms. He thought of Earth, of the generations who had lived and died looking up at a sky that was a lie, a beautiful prison wall they could never breach. He felt the immense, patient power of the Nexus, the silent chorus of a billion minds and a century of desperate innovation, and he knew there was no choice at all, only an answer. He met the swirling gaze of the Arbiter on the screen. Humanity is not a problem to be solved. Arbiter, we are not a dissonance in your song. We are a song of our own. He took a deep breath, the finality of his words settling over him like a shroud. We respectfully decline your offer. For a long moment, the Arbiter was still, a statue of incandescent light. The mental voice, when it came again, was devoid of all its false warmth, stripped down to its core of absolute galactic power. We had hoped you would choose wisdom. You have chosen obsolescence. The choice is recorded. The image of the Arbiter vanished from the screen, replaced once more by the view of the stewardship fleet. The serene, artistic beauty of the ships was gone. The crystalline lattices began to shift and reconfigure, their internal structures glowing with a terrifying, atomically purple light. The graceful sculptures were transforming, their true nature revealing itself. They were not just works of art, they were instruments of erasure, and they were turning their full, harmonious power on the lone station and the system it guarded. Energy spike across the entire fleet. Petrova called out, her voice tight with fear. They're generating a resonance field. It's targeted at the entire inner system. Sir, the field is designed to disintegrate all complex matter on a subatomic level. Eris stood firm, his eyes fixed on the approaching wave of purple energy that began to emanate from the lead vessel. A wave of perfect, orderly destruction. He could feel the panic of his crew, a rising tide of primal fear. But beneath it, he could also feel the Nexus. And the Nexus was not afraid. It was awake, and it was ready. Lena, Eris said, his voice ringing with a strange, newfound calm. Tell the Nexus, it's time to sing our song. The command left Eris's lips and hung in the recycled air of the bridge, a fragile, human sound against the coming storm of cosmic law. On the main screen, the wave of perfect, orderly destruction advanced, a silent tsunami of iridescent purple energy that did not radiate light so much as consume it, leaving a wake of deeper, more absolute blackness behind it. It was beautiful, the way an apex predator is beautiful, its form a testament to its lethal efficiency. The crew of Jaina Station held their collective breath, hands frozen over consoles, their faces bathed in the glow of their impending annihilation. Eris felt no surge of power from the Kuiper belt, no thrum of engines, no hum of charging capacitors. The Nexus did not respond like a machine. It responded like a thought dawning. He felt it as a subtle shift in his own perception, a sudden, breathtaking clarity, as if a lifetime of looking at the universe through frosted glass had just been wiped clean. It was a feeling of profound, infinite complexity being resolved into an elegantly simple answer. The Nexus did not build a wall to stop the wave. It reached into the fundamental principles that gave the wave its existence and gently, surgically, snipped the threads that held it together. Out in the void, the impossible happened. The advancing crescent of purple energy, a force capable of unmaking a planet, simply ceased to be. It did not explode. It did not fizzle. It unraveled. The perfect Orcs coherent wavefront lost its cohesion, its intricate matrix of resonant frequencies dissolving into a cloud of harmless, exotic particles that drifted and shimmered like dust motes in a sunbeam before fading back into the quantum foam from which they had been summoned. The attack was over. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than the silence that had preceded it. It was a silence filled with utter disbelief. On the bridge, someone let out a choked sob of relief. Lena Petrova's hands flew across her console, her face a mask of bewildered awe. "Sir, I don't. The wave is gone. All energy readings have returned to baseline. There's no residual radiation, no spatial distortion. It's as if it was never there. The readouts are nonsensical. Physics doesn't just stop." Eris let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His knees feeling weak, he steadied himself on the command chair, his mind still reeling from the echo of the Nexus's action. It was like witnessing a grandmaster of chess not just outplaying an opponent, but changing the rules of the game on a whim, making the opponent's pieces forget how to move. He understood now that they had built something that didn't operate on the same plane of reality as their oppressors. The stewardship used physics as a weapon. The Nexus used the language of physics as an instrument. Before anyone could process the miracle, the Arbiter hailed them again. A swirling vortex of light reappeared, but its form was agitated, its perfect symmetry disrupted by flickering, discordant sparks, and the mental voice was no longer a serene symphony. It was a shriek of cold, intellectual fury. What was that explain this violation? You have tampered with the fundamental harmonics of space-time. That is a greater transgression than the construction of your weapon. That is a crime against reality itself. "We did nothing but defend ourselves," Eris replied, his voice steadier now, emboldened by the Nexus's silent, overwhelming display of power. "You fired a weapon intended to erase us from existence. We simply chose not to be erased. Perhaps your harmony is not as absolute as you believe." The Arbiter's light flared violently. "Insolent primitive. Your chaotic, illogical defiance is precisely why you were quarantined. Order must be imposed. You have demonstrated that your species cannot be guided. It can only be contained or purged. You have made your choice. The transmission cut, and the stewardship fleet responded. This time, there was no grand, system-sweeping attack. The arrogance had been replaced by a focused, vindictive rage. From the crystalline hulls of the larger vessels, hundreds of smaller ships detached, needle-like slivers of light that moved with a speed that defied inertia. They were interceptors, automated attack drones, or perhaps something more, and they streaked across the void directly toward Janus Station, their intent unambiguous. "Multiple contacts on approach," Petrova shouted, her professional calm shattering. "Hundreds of them. Speed is impossible. They'll be on us in seconds. Point defense systems can't track them. Evasive maneuvers are useless." The bridge crew scrambled, their training kicking in even in the face of an unwinnable fight. Red alert klaxons blared, a jarring, primitive sound in the high-tech silence of the station. Eris ignored them. He knew that no physical defense would suffice. He closed his eyes again, reaching for the Nexus, not with a command, but with a plea. Protect us. Show them they cannot break us. The Nexus did not answer with another act of cosmic negation. It answered with something far more strange, far more intimate. It did not project a shield. It broadcast a story. As the swarm of needle ships closed in, a second wave emanated from the Kuiper Belt. This was not a wave of energy or force, but of pure, unadulterated information. It was the collected, chaotic, contradictory experience of what it meant to be human. The leading interceptors, guided by cold, logic-driven artificial minds, were the first to be struck by the wave of raw qualia. Their processors, designed to calculate trajectories and tactical solutions in picoseconds, were suddenly flooded with the illogical, overwhelming sensation of a child's first laugh. They felt the searing pain of a burn, the irrational hope of a prayer, the bitter taste of betrayal, the soaring melody of a forgotten symphony, the quiet comfort of companionship on a cold night. The drone's perfect synchronized attack pattern dissolved into madness. Waves of the ships simply went dark, their complex quantum processors fried by the sheer volume of paradoxical data. Others began to move erratically, their flight paths becoming dances of joy or ballets of sorrow. A cluster of them broke formation and began constructing intricate geometric patterns with their trails. A sudden, inexplicable urge to create beauty overwhelming their directive to destroy. Another group turned on each other, reenacting the Battle of Thermopylae in the cold vacuum of space, driven by phantom echoes of glory, sacrifice, and rage. It was a fleet defeated not by firepower, but by poetry and pain. On the bridge of Janus Station, the crew watched in stunned silence as the terrifying swarm of attackers turned into a chaotic, aimless flock of mad machines. Eris felt the broadcast wash over him as well, a phantom cavalcade of human history flashing through his mind. He saw the birth of agriculture, the fall of empires, the quiet dignity of 1 billion anonymous lives. He felt the terror of the Black Death and the exhilaration of the first moon landing. He was overwhelmed by the sheer, messy, beautiful, and horrifying tapestry of his own species. And for the first time, he understood the true nature of the Nexus. It wasn't a weapon. It was an archive. It was the soul of humanity. Given a voice, he understood it, too, that this was a far more profound violation to the stewardship than simply nullifying their weapon. To them, this raw, unfiltered chaos was the ultimate contagion, the antithesis of their entire philosophy. The Arbiter's response was immediate and visceral. A psychic scream of pure, undiluted hatred echoed across the system, a sound of such fury that it felt like a physical blow. The Arbiter, insulated on its command vessel, had witnessed its perfect, logical tools of war being defeated by what it could only perceive as a plague of insanity. Its patience was gone. Its pretense of magnanimity was burned away, and all that remained was the core of its being, a fanatical, unbending will to impose order. The largest of the crystalline ships, the vessel that housed the Arbiter itself, began to glow. But this was not the distributed purple of the resonance field. This was a single point of blinding, furious white light, concentrating at the ship's apex. It was the raw, unchanneled power of the vessel's singularity core, being focused into a lance of energy so potent it would not just unravel matter, but erase its very existence from space-time. Petrova's console shrieked a final, desperate warning. "Sir, The lead ship, it's bypassing all safeties. The energy output is. It's off the scale. I can't even quantify it. Eris's eyes widened in horror as he saw the trajectory. The beam wasn't aimed at Janus Station. It was aimed past them, on a perfect, unwavering line, a line that would take it across the inner system, past the orbit of Mars, to a single, fragile, irreplaceable target. "It's firing on Earth," Petrova whispered, her voice cracking with despair. Eris watched the star-bright lance of annihilation form, a divine judgment made manifest, and knew that they had shown the galaxy their soul, only to have it trigger their execution. The lance of white-hot annihilation did not cross the void. It pierced it, a needle of pure, focused reality negation. It moved with a purpose that was absolute. On the bridge of Janus Station, time seemed to stretch and thin, every second an eternity of helpless observation. Eris watched the incandescent line burn its way across the starfield, a celestial scar being carved in real time. He felt a profound, soul-crushing failure. His defiance, his species' grand declaration of independence, had led to this, the imminent execution of his world. The crew around him was frozen, their faces pale masks of horror, watching the live feed from distant orbital telescopes that showed the approaching star of doom. There were no more calculations to be made, no evasive maneuvers to attempt. They were merely spectators at the end of everything they had ever known. He reached out to the Nexus, a desperate, silent scream of a thought. "Do something, anything, please." For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing, only the cold, placid ocean of awareness at the edge of his mind, and the onrushing spear of light that would boil Earth's oceans and strip its atmosphere in a single, silent flash. He felt the first tremor of true despair, a cold certainty that he had fatally miscalculated, that humanity's greatest creation was no match for the raw, brute force power of the stewardship. And then he felt the Nexus move. It was not a surge of energy or a ripple of thought. It was a sensation he had no words for, a feeling of immense, cosmic deliberation, as if a god were flexing a muscle for the first time in an eon. The Nexus was not preparing a defense. It was preparing a response. Across the inner solar system, the very nature of space began to change. The effect was subtle at first, a faint, almost imperceptible distortion in the view screen. The distant stars seemed to shimmer, their light bending as if seen through a heat haze. But this was no thermal distortion. This was the geometry of the universe itself being actively, willfully rewritten. The Nexus had perceived the Arbiter's attack not as a projectile to be blocked, but as an equation to be solved, a line of logic to be recontextualized. It reached out its intangible will and took hold of the space-time continuum between the Arbiter's flagship and Earth, and with a force of unimaginable gravity and precision, it began to fold it. The beam of annihilation, traveling in what was, from its own perspective, a perfectly straight line, suddenly found its path leading it astray. On the view screen, the impossible became reality. The lance of light, a force that should have been immutable in its trajectory, began to curve. It was a gentle, graceful, horrifying arc, like a river being diverted by a newly risen mountain range. The straight line of the beam remained straight, but the universe it was traversing was now a Mobius strip of vengeful geometry. The stewardship's perfect, rigid weapon of order was being turned back on itself by an act of pure, conceptual chaos. The Arbiter, from within its vessel, must have registered the anomaly, the utter violation of known physics. Its own targeting systems would be screaming that the beam was still on course, while its external sensors would be showing the impossible truth. The weapon of perfect order had become an agent of perfect chaos. The gracefully curving beam, now a scythe of incandescent rage, swept back towards its origin point. It carved a silent, perfect path through the stewardship's meticulously arranged fleet. The crystalline ships, those monuments to a rigid and unbending philosophy, had no defense against their own ultimate sanction. They did not explode. They were unmade. As the beam touched them, their complex lattice structures dissolved. Their internal singularity cores destabilized, and they vanished in flashes of light that were instantly consumed by the beam itself. Ship after ship, a dozen, then 24, were erased from existence. Their perfect geometric formation, now a ragged wound torn into the fabric of the fleet. The remaining ships scattered in a panic that was utterly alien to their nature, their perfect logic broken by a fear they were not designed to process. The Arbiter's flagship, the source of the beam, was the last in its path. There was a desperate, frantic pulse of energy from the vessel, a futile attempt to shut down the weapon, to stop the unstoppable force it had unleashed. But it was too late. The feedback loop was complete. The lance of pure annihilation struck the crystalline prow of the ship that had birthed it. For a fraction of a second, the Arbiter's vessel flared with a light so intense it outshone the sun. A nova of pure, concentrated power turning upon itself. And then, it was gone. Not just destroyed, but erased. Its very existence redacted from the space-time it had sought to police. The beam, its duration expended, winked out of existence. The aftermath was a silence that was louder than any explosion. A vast section of the once perfect stewardship fleet was simply gone. The remaining ships, perhaps a third of the original force, were in disarray, drifting aimlessly, their perfect formation shattered, their command structure decapitated. The psychic scream of the Arbiter's fury had been replaced by a psychic void, a gaping hole in the universe where its consciousness had been. On Janus Station, the crew stood like statues, their minds struggling to comprehend the scale of what they had just witnessed. They had not just survived. They had not just repelled an attack. They had utterly, catastrophically defeated a fleet from the most powerful organization in the known galaxy. They had turned the enemy's sword against them and broken it. Lena Petrova sank into her chair, her face ashen. "My God," she whispered, the words barely audible. "What have we done?" Eris leaned heavily against the command chair, his body trembling, not with fear, but with a draining, bone-deep exhaustion. He could feel the echo of the Nexus's effort in his own mind, a psychic resonance of the titanic strain it had taken to bend the universe to its will. The calm ocean of its consciousness felt distant, its placid surface disturbed by deep, slow-moving currents. It had won, but the effort had been immense. He looked at the main screen, at the tattered remnants of the assessment fleet, at the empty space where the Arbiter had been, and then his eyes found what he was looking for, a small, blue and white marble, hanging pristine and untouched in the blackness. Earth. It was safe. The wave of relief that washed over him was so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He had not led his people to extinction. He had led them to their first terrifying victory. But as the adrenaline faded, a new, colder realization began to set in. This was not the end. This was the beginning. They had not just broken their cage, they had shattered the galactic peace it was meant to preserve. They had not just defied the stewardship, they had killed one of its arbiters and annihilated a significant portion of its fleet. They had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were exactly the uncontrolled, chaotic, and catastrophically dangerous variable the stewardship had always feared them to be. The remaining crystalline ships began to move, not to attack, but to retreat. They folded space and vanished, one by one, leaving behind only the drifting debris of their fallen comrades in a profound, ominous silence. They were not fleeing in terror. They were retreating to report, to inform the vast, galaxy-spanning entity they served that the quarantined specimen in the Sol system was not just sentient. It was a power of the first magnitude, and it was hostile. The silence of the Sol system was once again a lie, but this time it was a lie of their own, making the quiet breath before the true storm. Eris straightened up, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by the immense, crushing weight of what came next. He had been a scientist. Now, he was the de facto leader of a species at war with the gods. He looked toward the empty void where the fleet had been and spoke to the silence. What now? This time, he was not speaking to his crew. He was speaking to the Nexus. The answer came back not in words, but in a single, resolute feeling that settled deep within his soul. It was a feeling of grim, unshakable purpose. It was the feeling of a shield being raised and a sword being drawn. It was the feeling of humanity, for the first time in 500 years, preparing to meet the galaxy on its own terms. The silence on the bridge of Janus Station was a fragile, crystalline thing, easily shattered. For long minutes, no one moved. They were a tableau of shock, their faces illuminated by the steady, indifferent glow of their consoles, which now displayed nothing but the serene, empty starfield where a galactic power had just been broken. The scent of ozone from a shorted-out secondary conduit was the only testament to the reality of the battle. Lena Petrova was the first to break the stillness. Her fingers, which had been frozen over her holographic interface, began to move, first tentatively, then with a frantic, obsessive speed. Data streams scrolled across her vision, complex equations and energy readings that were, by all accounts, impossible. "It's the gravity readings," she murmured, her voice distant, as if speaking to herself. "They're coherent." The space-time curvature wasn't a brute force event. It was structured. It had syntax. Eris. The Nexus didn't just bend space. It spoke to it. It persuaded it to change its mind. Eris heard her, but the words seemed to come from a great distance. His own mind was a field of psychic static, the afterimage of the Nexus's monumental effort. He felt a deep, resonant exhaustion that was not his own, a phantom ache from a muscle he never knew he had. The link to the Nexus was still there, but it was faint, like a distant signal struggling through interference. The vast, placid ocean was now a quiet, deep pool, its surface still, but its depths roiling with a slow, powerful recovery. He pushed himself away from the command chair, his legs unsteady. "Get me a direct channel to the Unity Council on Earth," he commanded, his voice rough. "They need to see this. They need to know what's happened." He knew that the next battle would be fought not with weapons of impossible physics, but with words, with the crushing weight of the future he had just single-handedly authored for 8 billion souls, and the connection was established in seconds. The main view screen, which had just displayed the death of a demigod, now showed the face of Chancellor Ava Rostova. She was an older woman, her features etched with the accumulated weariness of a lifetime spent managing the delicate balance of a unified planet living in a gilded cage. She looked at Eris, her expression grim. Behind her, the other members of the Unity Council were visible, their faces pale and taut. They had seen everything. "Aris." Rostova's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the deep shock. The orbital defense platforms tracked it all. The reports are difficult to reconcile with known reality. Eris met her gaze, seeing not a politician, but a fellow human being trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. They are reality now. Chancellor, he said, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. The stewardship's assessment, fleet is broken. The arbiter is gone. We are safe. For the moment. A nervous murmur rippled through the council members behind Rostova. One of them, a man Eris recognized as a high-ranking military strategist, leaned forward. Dr. Thorne, what you have done is a miracle, but you have also painted a target on our entire system. The stewardship is a galaxy-spanning entity. What we just fought was, in all likelihood, nothing more than a provincial patrol. What comes next? The man's question hung in the air, the unspoken fear that they had won a skirmish only to invite a war of extermination. That, Eris said, his gaze unwavering, is what we must now determine. The quarantine field is no longer a prison wall. It is the boundary of a battlefield. We can no longer think of ourselves as prisoners. We must begin to think of ourselves as a sovereign power. Rostova held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. The Nexus. Eris. What is its state? What was the cost of this? Miracle. It was the question Eris had been dreading. He closed his eyes, reaching inward for the faint connection. He felt the immense quiet, the deep weariness. The Nexus is recovering. The energy expenditure was beyond our ability to measure. It is not an infinite resource, Chancellor. It is the sum of our potential, and it has just exerted itself to a degree we never anticipated. It needs time. Time is something I fear we may not have. After the transmission ended, Eris retreated to his small, Spartan quarters. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the psychic exhaustion and the cold, stark reality of their situation. He sat in the dim light, the silence of the station pressing in on him. He knew he could not lead, could not make the decisions that needed to be made. With his understanding of the Nexus still so superficial, he needed to go deeper. He dimmed the lights completely and attached a small, silver device to his temple, a synaptic amplifier designed to create a cleaner, more stable connection to the neural lace. He closed his eyes and let his consciousness fall away from the metal and plastic of the station, seeking the quiet pool in the Kuiper belt. This time, he did not just brush against its surface. He let himself sink. The transition was seamless. He was no longer Eris Thorne, a man in a room. He was a disembodied point of awareness floating in a silent, endless ocean of pure thought. This was the true nature of the Nexus. It was not a computer or an AI. It was a mindscape, a conceptual space built from the entangled consciousness of every scientist, philosopher, and artist who had contributed to its creation over the last century. He felt their presence not as individual personalities, but as currents in the deep, the logical precision of the mathematicians forming the bedrock, the creative chaos of the artists painting the nebulae of thought that drifted in the abyss. It was the unified subconscious of humanity's genius, a presence coalesced before him, not a voice, but a focused stream of understanding directed solely at him. It was the core of the Nexus, its emergent self-awareness. It showed him the battle from its perspective. He saw the Arbiter's resonance field not as a wave of purple energy, but as a discordant, shrieking chord of mathematical hate, an equation of erasure. He felt the Nexus counter it by introducing a variable of pure logical negation, a quiet one that canceled the equation and made it null. He then experienced the wave of human qualia, the broadcast of emotion and memory, as a chaotic, polyphonic symphony of experience, a song of such complexity and contradiction that the stewardship's simple, Melodic logic could not process it and shattered. Finally, the Nexus showed him the final, terrible act, the folding of space-time. He felt the titanic effort it required, the raw exertion of will needed to grasp the fabric of the universe and command it to obey. The Nexus communicated to him that reality was far more malleable than humanity understood. The stewardship's power came from their mastery of the existing rules of physics. They were masters of the game. The Nexus's power came from its ability to edit the rulebook, and the edit had come at a cost. The Nexus showed him a vision of its own internal structure, vast, shimmering web of light. Oh, great sections of that web were dark, dormant, their energy utterly spent. It would take time to reignite them, to bring itself back to full capacity. They will return. The presence communicated a concept of cold certainty. They are rigid, predictable. They will not understand what we did. They will classify it as an anomaly of unknown origin. They will not believe a race of primitives could manipulate the foundational principles of existence. They will return with overwhelming, conventional force. They will come to sterilize the anomaly. Aris felt a cold dread. "What do we do?" he asked the silent ocean. The answer was immediate and shocking in its audacity. The Nexus did not show him a defensive strategy. It did not show him a plan to fortify the Sol system. It showed him the stars. It showed him the vast, intricate network of the stewardship, a web of interconnected systems and hyperspace lanes. And it showed him a single, critical node in that web, a place from which the stewardship projected its power, a command and control hub that regulated entire sectors of the galaxy. It was a place the stewardship would never imagine could be a target. The cage is broken, the Nexus communicated. A cage can also be a shield. To remain behind a shield is to await its failure. We must leave the shield behind. We must strike where they are strong, 'cause that is where they believe they are invincible. We must show them that chaos is not a flaw to be purged, but a force to be reckoned with. Eris's awareness returned to his body with a jolt. He was back in his dark room on Janus Station, his heart pounding. The plan was insane. It was suicide. It meant abandoning the only home humanity had ever known and throwing themselves into the heart of a hostile galaxy to attack an enemy of unimaginable powers. It was also the only path that did not end in a slow, inevitable death, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. He stood up, his exhaustion replaced by a terrifying, electric clarity. He walked back to the bridge, his steps firm, his purpose set. Lena and the others looked up as he entered, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty. They were waiting for a leader. He had to become one. "The stewardship will be back," Eris said, his voice ringing with an authority he had never known he possessed. "They will come with a force designed to wipe us from existence. We will not be here to greet them." He walked to the main view screen and brought up a star chart of the local galactic cluster. "For 500 years, we have looked at these stars as a prison wall. Now, we must see them as a road." He pointed to a single, nondescript star system dozens of light years away, a destination the Nexus had burned into his mind. "We are taking the fight to them. Lena, begin calculations." "I want to know how we can move this entire station." The initial reaction from the Unity Council on Earth was not acceptance, but a quiet, horrified paralysis. Eris's proposal, relayed across the vast emptiness of the inner system, was received as the ravings of a man unhinged by battle to abandon Earth, their home, their cradle, the only world they had ever known, for a suicidal strike against an enemy whose true scale they could not even fathom. It was not a strategy. It was a death wish. For 2 days, the debate raged. The feed to Janus Station was a constant stream of frantic arguments, fearful pleas, and angry denunciations. Military leaders argued for fortification, for turning the Sol system into an impenetrable fortress. Cultural preservationists wept at the thought of leaving behind the accumulated history of their species. Every human instinct screamed for them to hunker down, to protect the hearth, to fight for the soil beneath their feet. Eris stood against the tide of 8 billion voices, a lone figure on a distant bridge, his only ally the silent, patient entity in the Kuiper Belt. He did not argue tactics or logistics, he argued philosophy. To stay is to die, he repeated, his voice worn thin but resolute, in a final address to the full council. We would be fighting on their terms, in a cage of their choosing. They are the masters of conventional warfare, of overwhelming force and perfect order. We cannot win that fight. We would be a star, and they would be the endless night, and they would simply wait for us to burn out. Our only advantage, the only weapon we have that they cannot comprehend, is our unpredictability, our chaos. To win, we must become what they fear most, an uncontrolled variable that moves outside the rules of their game. We must abandon the game board entirely. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Nexus did not just build us a sword, it has shown us a door. To stay here is to wait for the executioner. To go is to seize the future, even if it is a future we cannot predict. It was the Nexus itself that cast the deciding vote. As the council remained deadlocked, a new phenomenon began, a gentle, shimmering aurora, not of magnetic particles, but of pure, coherent light, enveloped Janus Station. Then another appeared, farther out, around a deep space science outpost. Then another, around the orbital factories of Mars. The Nexus was reaching out, extending pockets of its space-time bending capability, demonstrating that it could create small, mobile pockets of safety. It was not just an offer to move the station, it was an order to bring along vital pieces of their civilization. An offer of an arc. This silent, irrefutable demonstration of power did what Eris's words could not. It made the impossible seem possible. The decision was made. The exodus began. It was a frantic, desperate, and magnificent undertaking. Under the Nexus's protective guidance, a small flotilla of humanity's most critical assets was assembled in the shadow of Janus Station. Seed banks, data cores containing the entirety of human knowledge and art, manufacturing bays, and the cryopreserved embryos of Earth's myriad species were all loaded onto repurposed vessels. It was a fleet of ghosts, carrying the memory and the future of a world they were leaving behind. The final moment was the hardest. Eris stood on the bridge, the main screen focused on the blue and white jewel of Earth. He watched the final transport vessel, carrying the last evacuees, including the Unity Council, nestle into the protective bubble of space-time being generated around the flotilla. From his vantage point, Earth looked peaceful, serene, utterly unaware that it was about to be abandoned by its children. It was the ultimate act of love and sacrifice to leave the thing you loved most in order to protect its memory. Nexus, Eris whispered, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Take us away. The journey was not a journey. It was a transition. The universe outside the flotilla did not streak or blur. It simply ceased to be, enclosed within a bubble of space-time curated by the Nexus. They existed in a state of transit, a pocket of reality moving through the gaps in the cosmic fabric. There was no sensation of speed, only a profound sense of dislocation. They were unmoored, a tiny island of human existence adrift on an impossible tide. For Eris, the transit was a period of communion. With the strain of the exodus complete, he spent his time connected to the Nexus, feeling its strength return. its dark, depleted webs of consciousness reigniting with a steady, quiet light. It showed him their destination, not as a point on a map, but as a concept. It was a system called Praxis by the Stewardship, the hub of their authority for 10,000 cubic light years. It was not a military fortress. It was a monument to their philosophy, a place of pure, unadulterated order. When they arrived, the reality was more staggering than any vision. The star of Praxis was not orbited by planets, but by a series of concentric, crystalline rings, each one spinning in perfect, counter-rotating harmony. The rings were impossibly thin, seemingly made of solid light, and they chimed with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the very structure of space. This was the source of the Stewardship's harmony, a celestial instrument that broadcasted order and stability. Millions of crystalline vessels moved along the rings in perfect, synchronized patterns, their movements as predictable and precise as the workings of a clock. It was the heart of the machine, a place of such daunting perfection that the idea of attacking it with their ragged flotilla felt like a single microbe trying to infect a star. "They don't even know we're here," Lena said, her voice a hushed whisper of awe and terror. The Nexus's bubble of space-time was a perfect blind, hiding them in a fold of reality just outside the system's perception. "What now, Eris? What can we possibly do against?" That Eris looked at the perfect and harmonious machine before them. He felt the full, that recovered power of the Nexus, and a vast, impatient ocean, ready at his command. He finally understood its plan. The Stewardship's greatest strength was its perfect, monolithic unity, its single, harmonious song. But a single, pure note, no matter how powerful, is incredibly fragile. It can be shattered by the introduction of a sufficiently complex and dissonant chord. "We are not going to fire a single weapon," Ares said, turning to his crew, his face illuminated by the serene, terrible beauty of Praxis. "We are going to give them a gift, the one thing they cannot process, the one thing their harmony has no defense against. We are going to give them all of us." He closed his eyes, surrendering his will to the Nexus, becoming the final conductor of humanity's symphony. He gave the final command not with a word, but with a feeling of love for his chaotic, beautiful, flawed species. The Nexus responded. From their hidden position, it did not fire a beam or launch a projectile. It opened its heart. It broadcast its entire being, the full, unedited, unfiltered archive of human existence directly into the central consciousness of Praxis. It was a wave not of energy, but of pure meaning. The perfect, clockwork minds of the Stewardship were suddenly slammed with the illogical fury of a parent defending a child. Their serene harmony was pierced by the dissonant chords of Beethoven and the chaotic improvisations of jazz. Their processors, designed for absolute logic, were flooded with the paradoxes of faith, the irrationality of love, the bitter irony of humor, the self-destructive impulse of addiction, and the transcendent beauty of a simple, selfless act. They experienced 1 billion lifetimes in a single second, every birth, every death, every triumph, every mistake, every quiet moment of despair, and every soaring flight of hope. It was a weapon of pure empathy. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The low, resonant hum of Praxis faltered. The perfect, counter-rotating rings of light began to flicker, their colors shifting from pure white to a chaotic, swirling aurora of 1,000,000 different hues. The synchronized movements of the ships devolved into random, erratic patterns. The perfect clockwork of the Stewardship had been shattered by a dose of unadulterated soul. The crystalline structures did not explode. They lost their coherence. The perfect geometry sagged and warped, fracturing not into shards, but into impossible, beautiful, and utterly chaotic new forms. The single, monotonous hum of order was replaced by a rising, multifaceted cacophony, a sound that was part scream, part laughter, part symphony. It was the sound of a system being born again, messy and unpredictable. Eris Thorn, the scientist who had become a leader, stood with his crew and watched as the heart of their enemy was not destroyed, but transformed. The war was not over, but the terms of existence had been fundamentally changed. Humanity had not brought death to the stars. They had brought life in all its chaotic, terrible, and beautiful glory. Janus Station, now a wanderer, the flagship of a homeless people, turned from the transformed system and faced the endless, unknown expanse of the galaxy. They were no longer prisoners. They were no longer refugees. They were a song the universe had never heard before, and they were finally free to sing it.